and its management. And now, to address the legal concerns of the community, Praise AM 1310 95.1 FM presents Legally Speaking. Here are today's hosts.
Good morning, everyone. This is Nathaniel Lee. Thank you for joining our show each week. I'd like to thank all the folks I run across during the course of the week who give me helpful ideas, and always thank you for listening. I had some really interesting comments this week as I walk in Kroger, a young man I talked to, but I'll cover a few of those things. I have today my superstar guest, attorney Vanita Banks, who is a cybersecurity expert and master's in tax, and just a brilliant research analyst. But before I get started, our call-in number is 833-653-3529, 833-653-3529. We got a lot of things to cover today, but I need to start off by giving you a stern warning. Since the 90s, Indiana had a seatbelt law, or since the 80s actually, had a seatbelt law that made it mandatory for you to wear a seatbelt when you're inside a car for you and your children and everyone else. But up until July 1st of this year, if you were involved in an accident and you were not wearing your seatbelt, it was not admissible into evidence to reduce your damages. Well, what has been happening over the years, billion-dollar corporation, insurance companies who makes record profits, they thought that they could add another defense. And so in consultation with our Republican-controlled legislators, they have introduced and got passed a law that says that if you're not wearing your seatbelt and you're involved in an accident, it can be used as a defense to the lawsuit. So in other words, a drunk driver can cross a double yellow line, hit you head on, and you have all sorts of broken bones and things like that, and you're not wearing your seatbelt. Now they're going to say, it's not so much a drunk driver why you got injured so bad. Yeah, we caused the accident, but your damage is caused because you're not wearing a seatbelt. So that could alter significantly the verdicts in the case. And so as a warning, as of July 1st, the governor just this week signed a law that allows, is House Bill 1090, that allows seatbelt non-use as a defense. I've dealt with this in other states like Michigan. It's a maximum of 5%. Indiana did not put a cap on that. So this is a bad bill for consumers and for drivers, but just a warning, make sure that you buckle up, because the money that you save may be your own if you have an accident. Don't forget that, folks.
Attorney Lee?
Yes.
And so that law is based on a theory of contributory negligence. If an individual involved in an accident is not wearing their seatbelt?
That's a very good question. Indiana has a modified comparative fault, which means that we're the 50.1% rule, right? So in Indiana, in order to recover in a personal injury or a negligent action, you have to be less than 50% at fault, a 49.9% maximum fault. The concept is based on the fact that contributory negligence acts as a bar to recovery in Indiana. So if you sue a government agency in Indiana, and this could be really tricky, if you're 1% at fault, you bar from recovery. So you sue a government agency, contributory negligence is a bar also in medical malpractice cases. In auto accident cases, you have to be greater, be more than 50% at fault in order to not recover. The problem with the seatbelt law is that they did not put a limitation on the use of the law. So the early bill I looked at, I didn't look at the one that the governor signed this week. I'll take a look at it probably tonight or tomorrow. But I've been against that since they tried to introduce it back in the 90s. It was like Senate Bill like 318 or something. And I gave evidence against it back then because, see, the only person that benefit by seatbelt defense, or like there are, or people who paying out billions of dollars in claims. It's a mechanism whereby you reduce the recovery. But the other part about it is that when you're doing a jury trial, these are hard cases to win. They're very difficult to win. But you throw in a wrinkle and all of a sudden there's a new defense. And so you go in the jury room and you start talking about, well, what about that seatbelt? Well, the seatbelt wasn't the drunk driver that almost killed you. The seatbelt, even if you used it, may not prevent people from dying in a lot of cases. So the point I'm making is that it's a bad law, but it's a law that it doesn't really promote safety, because we already had a law in the book that required you to wear seatbelts. If you didn't wear a seatbelt, you could get a fine or a penalty. So this is a law solely about money, and that's it. It's about money. And it would be your money that you lose if you do a jury trial. So that's the extent of it. Now, Counselor, one thing I need to also that we talked about was the Fani Willis debacle down in Georgia, in the Georgia election case. I talked to a couple lawyers down in Georgia about that, just to verify something I thought was important. Just to refresh everybody's recollection, during the presidential election, Donald Trump and others attempted to usurp the rights of voters in Georgia by fixing an outcome by creating about 12,000 additional votes. The calls were recorded and played publicly 1,000 times. And so everybody heard with their own eyes, they saw what happened. And so the net result is that a lot of folks got indicted for misconduct, and they had evidence that was overwhelming evidence. And then the lawyers in the case immediately started pleading guilty. Now, during the course of the matter, the district attorney, Fani Willis, had an affair with one of the prosecutors. The allegation that's raised that the special prosecutor, who had been billing the county at a rate of $250 an hour, somehow the district attorney benefits financially from him being paid by the prosecutor's office. Now, what was absurd about this whole situation is that the people representing the defense, such as the Trump lawyers, when you look at the financial disclosure, they get paid millions of dollars for representing him in less than a year. The prosecutor's been involved in the case for over 2.5 years. And so the public saw that they got paid over $600,000, not realizing that the defense lawyer's rate of pay is about 3 times as much. So that's the setting. And they file a motion, and there's the judge, instead of having the case decided like you typically do, that is that you file a motion, you attach an affidavit, and you present evidence to support your contention. Evidence. So if you're saying that the prosecutor has been financially benefited by this relationship, then produce the evidence. Well, the thing is, there was no evidence that somehow she benefits, because she makes a pretty substantial salary. She has her own money. And so, and the fact of the matter remains is that the amount that the prosecutors are paid is not that great rate of pay. $250 an hour for a lawyer of 20 years is not a lot of money. But anyway, that's the background. And so this week, the judge decided that they would allow the defendant to appeal his ruling. This is a discretionary matter in which he could have squashed, and but this rate's going to go forward. And of course, an appellate process, I'm not sure how long it takes in Georgia, but typically here in our state is between 9 to 15 months. And so that means that trial probably be in 2025 sometime. I'm speculating, of course. And that's my review of it. And because I was asking Attorney Banks, some lawyers down in Georgia, it's one of those subjects that a lot of people are afraid to touch. But the one thing that was interesting is that his former law partner, who get dismissed from the firm for some misconduct, is the person, the catalyst that turned in all the evidence to the Trump team. And I thought that was an amazing set of events. And that's kind of what my take on this process at the time.
So many thoughts on this case, Attorney Lee. First, let's understand, and of course, the strategy of the former president's team is to delay. I mean, that is their defense strategy. And apparently it's worked to delay this case until after the election. And so a couple other components, as you know, the proceedings are televised, but I'm concerned about why was this evidence, or why was this information ever even admitted in this case? It seems to me that, and of course, we'd have to do a detailed review of the Georgia Rules of Evidence, Attorney Lee, but it seems to me that this is a matter, and as you stated, there had to be evidence that should have been considered in camera in the judge's chambers. Now, keep in mind that this judge is, I understand, the former president's, one of his appointees. And I think what's happening is that, and some people have said that the former president, he's getting bonus due process, right? Every effort is being made to ensure that he gets a fair and just trial, and trials on these 91 indictments that he's facing across the nation. I think some part of that, people are being very, very careful because you're prosecuting a former president. And then I think there are others that are trying to tip the partisan scale, right, in their election. But it was fascinating to me to see this former law partner and divorce attorney for the special prosecutor, Nathan Wade, provide information to Trump's defense attorney. We see all these texts where he's providing information which led to the Trump defense team alleging this personal relationship between Fani Willis and the special prosecutor. I mean, he's the one that shared that information with the Trump team and then flipped on the stand, stating that he didn't have any knowledge and that his claims were only speculation. And again, the former president's defense team based her whole disqualification claim on the information that was provided by the former law partner and divorce attorney. And that was just, from my perspective, outrageous and amazing to me. But in the end of the day, the strategy to delay appears to have worked.
That's an excellent point, Counselor. The lawyer's name was Terrence Bradley. That's Terrence Bradley, Bradley. And what was interesting, I didn't get this part of the case. And, I've litigated I don't know, over 1,000 cases easily. But what was bizarre to me is that somehow a person that went to law school thought that it would be a good idea to share information he learned while in part represent a client. Then somehow I think that, and then when they go to court, claim attorney-client privilege. So I was thinking to myself, and I hate to say this, I said, this got to be the dumbest idea I ever heard. If you think that attorney-client privilege is not waivable, how did he get out of law school? How was that possible that you didn't know that if you put things out in the universe that you yourself violate attorney-client privilege and somehow you could take it back? You cannot. And so when I saw that, I'm thinking, part of the problem I had is that I was thinking, how did he ever pass the bar exam? But in any event, that was my take on it. I was bewildered that the lawyer would try to claim attorney-client privilege after you're given every bit of information you can that somehow enhance this charade and think you could take it back. Absolutely dumb idea, folks. You can't. I've done cases, for example, the same privilege applies to husband-wife. So you get into litigation, and I've had all sorts of cases over the years where we'll start off, we have a husband and wife, and sometime the marriage crumbles and the parties don't get along for whatever reason, and they get a divorce. Well, in litigation, that's bad because when you're doing a personal injury claim, you have a claim for the husband, for example, who get injured in an accident, or the wife, and then you have a secondary claim for loss of the spouse services. Well, a tactic is because defense lawyers see the fact that the husband is in a divorce and then he want to get the wife to testify. I've never allowed that to happen because we have a spousal privilege, right? So spousal privilege is just as powerful as attorney-client privilege. And so it's not waivable unless they agree to waive it. And so we keep that out of evidence. We do not allow the divorced spouse to testify against the litigant. And so the same idea, in this case here, we had a lawyer represented in a divorce case, also a former law partner, and that's what I thought was insane about it, Attorney Banks. I'm thinking this kind of violates every rule that you could think of in terms of ethics.
I agree wholeheartedly with your assessment, Attorney Lee, and it appears that none of these things that we're talking about was ever even considered in this case. And it really doesn't speak well to Attorney Bradley, or from my perspective, the presiding judge in this case.
Yes, Scott McAfee, who's appointed by the Republican governor. Interesting scenario, but we'll see how it plays out.
It's complicated as well and confusing the more I read about it. But I think that we've tried our very best to break it down to its component points. There's a lot of nuances in this case. And so it's just, again, mind-boggling to me. I just don't believe that this evidence or that this information, because there's never any evidence, should have been admitted in the first place.
Hey, before we get into the next topic, here's one thing that I don't get, Counselor, is that I watch the news shows, and one of the things I observed this week is that they kept giving these polls, right? And the political pundits were saying that every time that the former president get an adverse charge or arrest or whatever, that he get a bump in the polls. When in American history have we ever seen anything so ludicrous? Say you get the person running for president of the United States can't even run a business in the state of New York now. The person running for the president of the United States have over $500 million in judgment against them. And the concern that I have is that if you have that much debt and you're not in a good position to file bankruptcy because there's some adverse consequence could happen because that kind of kills your bravado saying I'm filthy rich, is that type person more susceptible to bribes? We saw what happened with TikTok. Everybody's against TikTok. They're saying the Chinese government is collecting information on American citizens, the Chinese government. Then there's a fundraiser by a person who has an interest in TikTok. Then all of a sudden we see the former president reverse. So it's a scary time in terms of American politics as to where we're going. But on a happy note, Counselor, Chicago, we had your local election there. What's going on in Chicago?
Well, one of the things, unfortunately, in the last primary election was, unfortunately, again, very low voter turnout. I think it was less than or about 22%. And that was less than the turnout in recent years. Primary turnout is historically low, but very, very low in this last election. So that was one of the outcomes. In the Illinois Supreme Court race, Judge Joy Cunningham, she easily won her election to the Illinois Supreme Court. Our member, unfortunately, Leonard Murray, did not prevail in his appellate court judicial race. And one of the races that's being watched across the nation is the Cook County State's Attorney election to replace Kim Foxx, who did not run for a third term. That race between Clayton Harris and Eileen O'Neill Burke is too close to call. The last I saw, the race was down to 6,700 votes. Eileen Burke is ahead. She's a former appellate court judge, and Clayton Harris is a former prosecutor. He's a professor, and he's held several government posts. He's backed by the Democratic Party, and lots of money was poured into this race, over $4 million, and $2 million of which was contributed to Miss O'Neill Burke's campaign, and a significant amount of that by Republican donors. She's backed and endorsed by the Chicago Police Union. Clayton Harris is endorsed by the labor unions, and again by the Democratic Party. This election is too close to call, and there are a significant number of mail-in ballots that will continue to be counted until April 2nd.
Wow. That's got to be agonizing.
Absolutely. I believe there are over 100,000 mail-in ballots. Those Mail-in ballots may trend in Justin Harris's favor, Clayton Harris, I'm sorry, favor. We'll see.
Well, election matters. I just, with all the money spent on the election, did they point out any factors that why the voter participation level was so low? We had the same thing here in Indianapolis, and in our mayor's race last year, we had a candidate spend $15 million for a job that paid about $100,000 a year to be mayor of Indianapolis and lost by over 20 points, right? Every day I woke up, no matter what time, it was 3 in the morning, 6 in the morning, he had commercials on every channel. Drove me nuts. And he lost because the county is like 75% Democrat, Marion County, Indianapolis. But what got me, despite spending all that money, we had like 650,000 votes in the county, and the candidates combined got less than 200,000 votes. So I don't get it. We had some significant issues at stake. And what we're seeing, Attorney Banks, is like in our state races now, I watched the commercial, the Republican primary, they're getting really ugly. They had one on today that I saw was just purely racist, They were attacking Senator Mike Braun, who's a hardcore conservative, because he supported the goals of Black Lives Matter, which was saying that we don't want police officers murdering African-American citizens. And they said that he supported people that kill police officers. They had that on a commercial today. It was shocking. It was just shockingly false. But the fact that they run a commercial for the sole purpose of creating racial division in our state, in our community. And so in that Cook County race, that they, with all the money they raised, did they get into some nasty advertising?
Not as much. Both really raised some of the same issues. Let me just say that the Chicago voter turnout was shockingly low. There are more than 1.5 million registered voters in Chicago, and only about 20% turned out for this election. As you know, Kim Foxx was one of several progressive prosecutors that were elected across the nation, and she and others have been criticized as being soft on crime. And to your question, Attorney Lee, Clayton Harris advocated that race disparity should be taken into consideration, and that there should be improved community relationships with the police. And he focused his campaign around safety and justice, that both were important components to address. Ms. Burke, argued for harsher penalties for those that contribute to the illegal flow of guns in Chicago, which I read this week that Chicago has the largest number of mass shootings, with 35 last year. And a mass shooting is defined as where 4 or more people are killed or injured, not including the shooter. And those are metrics that are issued by the Gun Violence Archive. And so gun violence in Chicago, of course, is a big issue. And both candidates suggested that they would address that issue as well.
Wow. Well, let's, you got a question or comment for us today, sir?
Yes, Brother Nate, Attorney Banks, appreciate you all. Thanks. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks for taking my call. And I'd like to add an addendum to Attorney Banks. We know that conservative talking points always want to highlight Chicago, but I just read from the FBI crime statistics that in 2023, Chicago was number 22 in gun violence in the country. Indianapolis was 17. Number 1 was St. Louis, Memphis. I think they were jockeying between 1 and 2. So I know Chicago gets a lot of beat up, but when we look at the statistics, which statistics don't always tell everything, but they give us a picture, Chicago kind of gets an unfair treatment when we look at it, when Indianapolis is at 17 and Chicago is at 22. And for people who are listening, this is all based on population of the cities. It's based on population. Okay, so Chicago has a lot more people than a Memphis or St. Louis, but they go by the proportionality of the population. So when I tell this to people in Indianapolis, they can't believe it, but go look at our numbers. We're for population, proportionate to population, we're ahead of Chicago. So I just want to throw that out there. Brother Nate, the ruling from the SCOTUS on Texas on allowing the basically stop and frisk of anybody that looks like they're illegal down there. I'd like your opinion on that. I thought that that was a job of the federal government. Seemed like they've just said to hell with it and thrown everything out the window. A number of constitutional scholars have just said that they've just, Elie Mystal and others have said they've just thrown the Constitution out the window. And then number 2, down in Texas again, you had another attorney, well-known from a law firm, who wrote a female black federal judge a disparaging letter, threatened her, matter of fact, wrote this letter to her and disparaged her, called all kind of names, and he was fired from his law firm, and I was hoping that he gets disbarred because it was such egregious what he wrote to this black female federal judge that was appointed by Biden down there. These are things that probably don't get mainstream media attention, but I read a lot online. And we've got a real nasty white male conglomerate that think they can attack our black judiciary. We've seen that with what goes on with Trump, and it's going on in other different places. So I'd like to throw that out there, your opinion of the Supreme Court decision on that Texas decision, and many scholars saying they're just throwing the Constitution out the window. And we've seen that with a lot of decisions they've made lately, but you're right, elections matter, and that's the reason why we have this court. And thanks for taking my call.
Well, I'm familiar with that, Emma Tech. I saw that, and I probably should have brought her up earlier. Judge Erica Hughes down in Texas, and she got a letter from a Houston attorney who was terminated and fired by his law firm for writing this disparaging letter. It was attorney Ben Adderholt at H-O-L-T, and I'd seen that story develop, but it's a common theme. We saw Judge Chutkan in the DC court, and so whenever it's becoming a pattern, it seems like whenever you see people engaged in the legal process, and there lately been a constant attack, particularly against African-American female judges. It just, whether Judge Chutkan or otherwise, it's just been becoming a pattern. And along with not just judges, but the prosecutors, the female prosecutors. And so now the lawyer could be subject to disciplinary type adjudication, but typically when I looked at cases, generally it resulted in a 30-day suspension and not disbarment. But the problem is that a 30-day suspension could be almost a disbarment, depending on the condition they put on the suspension. So I suspect that that lawyer will have some type of ethical consequence. And but beyond that, we have to see what the legal process results from this misconduct. And I think it is ethical misconduct, but we'll have to wait and see what occurs. The second issue that he mentioned dealt with the Texas debacle in terms of these laws they passed. I looked at those as they were occurring, but I'm not sure of what the outcome is because I've not read the actual opinion, because they sent part of the case back to the circuit court. And so it's a mixed bag right now because I'm not sure that case has a final decision yet. And I have to read the opinion a little bit more carefully to determine the outcome, unless Attorney Bank know about it. That was one of the issues that I didn't follow up on because I had briefed through myself this week.
I had earlier taken a look at this. Is this the Texas appeal is this the Texas case relative to the migrant?
Yeah, it was one with the Supreme Court, one's in the circuit court, and then I didn't read both opinions. I was going to read the excerpt before the show, but I don't remember what happened on the cases. It seemed like one said that it seemed like the appellate court said that it was unconstitutional. The Supreme Court did not grant a stay or something. It was something
exactly. Exactly. And now the issue's being considered again by the appellate court. And so more to follow on that one. And I also wanted to just echo our earlier caller's comments regarding gun violence, and he was referencing Indianapolis and Chicago. And again, it depends on what metrics you're looking at, and there are lots of different polls and different metrics. I was referencing the gun violence archive metrics, and specifically with respect to mass shootings. However, there are other statistics that show that, well, first of all, that homicides in general are decreasing across the nation, and that of the cities with the most violent crime, the Chicago doesn't even rank in the top 10.
Really?
Yes. So there's really a disconnect between the perception of Chicago and reality.
Okay. We have another caller. Caller, you have a question or comment for us today?
Yeah, this is Guy. There are going to be a lot of different assertions as the year unfolds in terms of what's going on in the elections and around the country. And I just wondered, are you aware of any, like a truth in advertising or truth in assertions agency or organization that's trying to counteract that? If not, would you consider with your various influences, with your various organizations that you're working in, trying to set up something like that on a nationwide scale?
Well, that's an excellent point. But what has happened is the First Amendment has been broadened, and now with the current court situation, we had a lot of rules in place for campaign and funding. A lot of this has to do with funding political campaigns, right? And so when campaigns have a lot of money, they can throw a lot of mud into the campaigns. And the only remedy from our legal standpoint now, in terms of the negative advertisement, is that you still can be sued for defamation. And I suspect that there are some of the biggest cases going on now from the 2020 presidential election. We saw that Dominion Voting had sued Fox, and they paid out what $750 million in terms of settlement for falsely asserting that they somehow had some corruption with their voting system, right? So the way that you can hold people legally accountable really is through defamation lawsuits. Now, in terms of the laws and things like that, it doesn't seem like there is a great deal of motivation in our country to try to reduce the vitriol we see in politics. Like even here in Indiana, today I was watching the news and there was an attack had against Senator Mike Braun. I didn't vote for Mike Braun. I think, he's beyond the pale in terms of his views, but they were trying to make him as though he's some bleeding heart liberal. Use that term loosely. The ads say that he support Black Lives Matter in their attempt to murder police officers, which was just fundamentally a racist statement. That movement had a lot to do with the fact that, like in our city, last fall, in about 3.5 months, we had 18 African Americans shot and killed by police officers here in the city, and not all those shootings were justified. And so the issue had to do with the treatment of human beings like human beings. That you should de-escalate situation. In a lot of cases, the police action can be justified, but the issue is, was it necessary? Was the killing necessary based on the circumstances? And I've investigated about 6 or 7 of these cases, and 3 of them, it wasn't justified nor necessary, in my opinion. And so we're going to be taking these into court, and assuming we get past the issue of qualified immunity, then we expect to try and win the cases.
And to Guy's question, there are organizations, including the League of Women Voters and many others, that are working to combat misinformation and disinformation in elections. And they have what's called a Democracy Truth Project to educate voters, because we're at a crossroads in terms of, and our democracy is very fragile at this juncture. And so the Women Power Democracy campaign is really aimed to strengthen democracy and restore trust in the election process by addressing and combating misinformation and disinformation. And there are chapters across the country that are focused on 4 things. One is to communicate the truth and then advocate on behalf of voters. You have to listen and stay alert. You have to do your fact checking and call out this disinformation and misinformation. And also, of course, it's important to advocate and promote the right to vote and encourage everyone to actually vote in every election. And so there are groups like this that have held hundreds of events across the nation, again, to promote truth in the election process.
Well, it's definitely needed, and I would hope that, these would get higher profiles in terms of both visibility and in an audio way, because I think the fight's going to be for basically the independence of the center in terms of people that are going to vote. And I think, for one example, you always have things that happen, like what's happening on the border, the southern border of the United States. And you have a situation where things happen, and then there's a credit, and then there's a blame, and who gets the credit and who gets the blame. Now, each side is going to say that the other side is to blame, and very little credit is going to be given to the other side, so to speak. So if there's a center, such as some of the groups that you mentioned, if they can become more visible and more prominent, I think that would go a long way toward helping the discussion, the public discussion.
Hey, Guy, let me ask you a question. This is a question that political candidates asked starting way back many years ago with Reagan. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? If somebody asked that question, what would your response be?
Yes, because if you look at all things that have happened, starting with when President Obama was elected in 2008, and you look what he had to do to rescue the country economically from what, there's always a situation like basically the Republicans are going to be for trickle down economics, and then the Democrats are going to be from bubble up economically. So it seems that a lot of times when the trickle down people are in office, it doesn't really trickle down too much. And I think that's a perfect example of what happened in 2008 when President Barack Obama got in office. He had to do a tremendous job with Larry Summers, in terms of economic policy. So I think people need to be reminded of these things. So,
but it's something that was very important. 4 years ago, when you woke up every day, there were people dying, hundreds, then thousands of people dying with COVID. Remember that?
Absolutely.
And what did
and some are still dying.
Yeah, but what did the then president say? He said, no, it'd be cured by the summer. Then he said that he suggested that people could cure it with bleach. With bleach. Remember that?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
The point is, because of that, when somebody asked that 4 years ago, and then everybody forgot about the fact that the unemployment rate under the former president got up to 9%. We were shelter in place, people dying, the economy been shut down, and then the government gave everybody money. And then towards the end of the administration, we saw something remarkable. The economy was tanking even with the massive deficit created by the former presidency. Since 1929, when they started the deficit, it was zero. By the time Trump became president, it was 21 trillion. In 42 months, it grew up to $28 trillion. And why? Because we had this tax cut for billionaires that benefited the top 1% of people in the country. And so we created this massive deficit. Now, African-American unemployment is the lowest it's ever been. The stock market is the highest it's ever been. Everywhere you go on the interstate, there's repairs. That's federal money. That's federal dollars in which the Biden administration get no credit for. So all these things that happen that people don't see around them, and that realizing that when they ask that question, they say, I'm not better off. Well, you are better off because you're not dying. You're afraid to leave the house. You're afraid to leave the house because you might get a virus and die.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and the people that you're speaking of, they would say that the former president has the best economy going, which is incredible to me, you know. But I don't hear any of the supporters of the Biden administration. I don't hear too much about them saying what actually happened. Is what my point is, and I think, you know, if the truth doesn't come out, then the lies of the other group are going to prevail in the minds of the voters.
Yeah, well, thank
to
you
a large extent.
That's a good point. Thank you very much for calling, guy.
That's an
Okay,
excellent point.
next
And
caller, real quickly, because we have a few minutes left. Next caller, we have Pastor Moore. How you doing today, Pastor?
Fine, doing well. Attorney Lee, great question. I think people need to be conscious of the fact, in order to find out the difference between the last 4 years and this 4 years, you're going to have to dig a little deep. And the reason why you're going to have to dig a little deep is because the issues that we suffered 4 years ago are deep issues. And this administration had to dig deep in order to bring about the recovery. We've saved lives from COVID. We've have somewhat of a better interest rate. It's not where it once was. We have jobs that are available. We have a lot of things that are going on that we in the Afro-American community are not looking at, because we don't seem to feel, some don't seem to feel that he has directly done something that is very noticeable to the community. But there are a lot of things that this administration has done to help this country recover. And I think it's important that we understand that. And people need to be conscious of the fact, if they're going to vote their conscience, they've got to look at what's going on right now. Thank you, Lee.
Thanks so much,
Attorney.
Pastor. Any closing comment, Attorney Banks, before we conclude? And by the way, next week is Easter, so that's going to be a holiday. We're going to be off. Attorney Banks?
I wanted to wish everybody a happy Palm Sunday weekend as we move toward Easter Sunday next week. I am concerned that callers like Guy and others are saying that they're not hearing directly what the Biden administration is doing. And you've listed a lot of the things, and the pastor that just called in, you know, also including student loan debt relief, the cost of insulin, which impacts so many of our communities. That should be a direct benefit to our communities that we should be able to feel. I was hearing about, Attorney Lee, and we can talk more about the $400 per month, is it, to residents to put down payments on homes. That's being talked about. So there really is a lot, but the bottom line is that the narrative has to get to down to the people.
Yeah, one final comment. We lost a great statesman, stateswoman, Senator Jean Breaux. Condolences to her family. We lost a great leader. Also, we lost a great friend, Farrell Henderson. So condolences to those family. And we'll join you in 2 weeks. And until we talk again, may God continue to bless each and every one of you. And make sure you go out to church for Easter. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, and God bless.